As we're getting into some pretty deep stuff tonight, so I need you guys to hang in there with me. I need you to be patient. I need you to understand you're not leaving this call today as experts in the topics we're going to cover. Maybe you've reviewed it before we got to class today. Maybe you didn't. Either way, you're going to have to spend time with this material. Some of this stuff you're not going to be able to grasp the first go around. So everybody, please remember to take big, deep breaths with me. Be patient, hang in there, and plan to spend time with it this weekend. And know I'm around all weekend to help. So we last left, I'm going to go back one slide. We last left last night talking about how agency can terminate. And we looked at the several different ways that it can terminate. And the last thing we talked about was this duty of confidentiality. It's expected to continue even after our agency agreement ends. Remember, you're not going to run down the street and say, I know why they're selling their house. That's not fair to them. However, that duty of confidentiality goes away when all of a sudden you're bringing a new client into the other side. So we talked about your listing agreement expiring. The seller lists with another firm. You bring the buyer client. Who do you owe your loyalty to today? Who gets old car today? And today, I see your mouths go, yeah, today it's the buyer. Yesterday it was the seller. Today it's the buyer. So we always need to know where our current agency agreement is between the client and the firm. I've got to go off textbook for a couple slides. All right, there's some information that's in the syllabus that's not in your book. So we're going to go off book for just a minute. And we're going to talk about, we're going to start talking about real estate agency relationships. And there's a couple different types of firms that the consumer can work with. So the first type of firm that the consumer can work with is a sole practitioner. How many people work at the sole practitioner? How many brokers are there? When you see the word sole, you see one. So sole practitioner is a one-man show. Now, maybe the sole practitioner, probably the sole practitioner has created an entity, in which case the consumer's relationship is with the entity, with the one broker acting as their agent. We're going to talk more about your choices. You'd be a sole proprietor or a firm. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into license law and commission rule. You'll probably see that when you start looking through your license law and commission rule comments. So the sole practitioner is one broker. It's a one-man show. There are not any other agents in the firm. I'll pause for a couple extra seconds since this isn't in your book. Make sure you got it. And remember, you got my PowerPoints and we're recording, so you have this information. The other option, welcome. The other option that we have, consumer hires a sole practitioner, or the consumer hires a firm, a real estate firm. Maybe there's one person, maybe there's 500 brokers. We got some big firms here in the triad. So the agency agreement is between the firm and the consumer. All brokers affiliated with the firms are agent of the firm, and they become sub-agents of the client. I'm going to talk more about that second bullet in just a minute. So hang on to that. We'll discuss that more in just a minute. So now to get us back in the textbook, we're going to talk about some different types of agency relationships. And first off, what I want to say before we get into this discussion, please keep in mind that your exam is not going to be how you are going to conduct your business. Your exam is going to be on how you can conduct your business. Okay. Sometimes you guys, oh, I wouldn't do that. Why would anybody do that? Doesn't matter. The real estate commission says you can, and that's what they're testing you on. So the top of page 153 is the nice little summary. I like to keep things simple when I can. The nice little summary of things that we're going to talk about, ways that you can, your firm can have agency relationship. And the first type of agency relationship is the exclusive seller agency. And in the exclusive seller agency, the firm represents sellers only. The firm does not represent buyers. Sellers are clients, buyers are customers. Yeah, do you have a question? We're not seeing this much around the triad, but you get into smaller areas, we see this. We have an instructor here with Carolina School of Real Estate that lives down near Troy. Troy, you go down 109 past Denton, keep going down into Uwharrie. And she lives and works in the Lake Tillery area. And in the area that she works, they're either, her firm, for example, will only work with sellers. If they work with buyers, the buyers are the customers. So think about what you're saying as this firm. You're saying, as long as you're my seller, you get full client service. But if you ever want me to help you buy a house, you're getting downgraded, right? You're going from a client to a customer. So some firms may do an exclusive seller agency where they only represent sellers. Flip that coin. Some firms may do a buyer agency only, in which they only have buyer clients. They don't take listings. So the properties that they have to show buyers are listed by other firms, or FSBO, for sale by owner. Again, what the firm is saying is, as long as you're buying a house, you'll get my full representation. If you ever want to sell, I can't help you. I need to refer you to somebody down the street, because we don't take listings. We don't take seller clients. There is a type of agency relationship called single agency. And in single agency firms, the firm represents the buyer or the seller in one transaction, but never both in the same transaction. So it's either a seller client, buyer customer, or seller customer, buyer client. They represent one or the other, never both. Cases that they represent both, we're going to talk about in just a second. So single agency means they have how many agency relationships in this transaction? In this transaction, they just have one agency relationship. It's with one or the other. Again, we'll talk about what happens when they represent both in just a second. Another type of agency relationship that we've kind of talked about, but we're really going to talk about is something called sub-agency. The word sub is a prefix for under. So sub-agency is an agent of an agent. Think about a submarine, right? Sub is a prefix for under. So sub-agency is an agent of an agent. There are two different forms of sub-agency. So let's break these down one at a time. The first form of sub-agency. Let's pretend for a second. All of you pass your state exam and get your license. Yay, congratulations. and you're all licensed and you all decide to come to work for Julie's Real Estate Shop. Welcome aboard. It's good to have you. I am the firm. Everybody with me? You are brokers with my firm. I am the firm. This form of subagency, this first form of subagency says, when one of you get a listing, in a sense, all of you get a listing. Because whose listing is it? It's mine. So one of you is the listing agent. One of you is the one communicating with the seller, talking to the seller. By default, the rest of you are subagents. It's still my client. You owe my client OCAR. You may never see him. You'll probably never see him. Never talk to him, never have a conversation with him. It's guilt by association, right? You're a subagent because one of your peers signed an agency agreement with them. So when one of you says, I got a listing, we all need to celebrate, because guess what? When one of you gets a listing, we all get a listing because it's the firm's listing. Now, does that mean the listing agent can boss the rest of you around and tell you what to do and make you make copies? No, they're not working for the listing agent. It's a relationship by default. It's a sub-agency because it's not your listing, it's mine. So by default, has anybody ever been open housing and you walk inside and the agent you meet is not the agent whose name is on the sign? You're not meeting the listing agent in some cases. You're meeting another agent from the firm, but they still represent the firm. I'm sorry, they still represent the seller because of the relationship with the firm. They are a sub-agent. So why do I let them do in an open house? Because I know they have to treat my seller, even though they're not the listing agent, they have to treat my seller with OCAR because it's my listing. So this is the first way we can have seller sub-agency. One of you gets a listing, you're the listing agent. By default, the rest of you are sub-agents. Questions on this? The second form of sub-agency is when the agent brings the buyer customer. The buyer chooses not to be represented. For whatever reason, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Buyer chooses not to be represented. Remember, you're either represented or you're not. And if you're unrepresented, you're my customer. The sub-agency in this case may be an agent within your firm. It may be an agent with a different firm. They're not bringing their buyer client to the table. They're bringing their buyer customer. And if you want a role in this transaction, if you're here, you have to have a role. So if you're not representing the buyer, then your role is that of a seller's sub-agent. You have to have a reason to be here. You have to have a role. So if you're not representing the buyer, your role is that of a seller sub-agent. Guys, here's the deal. When I wake up every morning as a seller sub-agent, I currently don't have anybody with an existing buyer agency agreement. So when I wake up every morning as a seller sub-agent, I owe all of the sellers in the Triad MLS the same duty. As a seller sub-agent, I owe all the sellers in the Triad MLS the duty of finding them a ready, willing, and able buyer. That's my job, is to find ready, willing, and able buyer for sellers. When I think of ready, willing, and able buyer, I think of a three-legged stool. I need all three pieces. What happens if one of those legs falls down? Stool topples over, right? So we need three pieces. It's up to the firm if they're going to allow seller subagents to bring a buyer customer. Some firms have a policy that says, no, we only want to work with buyer's agents. Some firms say, gosh, I don't care. Just bring me a buyer. I don't care where they come from. Client, customer, I don't care. Just bring me a buyer. It's up to the firm's policy. And there has to be an agreement between the listing firm and the seller to offer seller subagency. There's such a thing called vicarious liability. And vicarious liability says that the buyer customer, or excuse me, the seller subagent, the one bringing the buyer customer, the listing firm's held liable for their actions. Could be held liable for their actions. Think about this. Would you want to be held responsible for somebody's actions that you never met before, you've never seen before? The first time you saw their name is when they presented an offer as a seller subagent. You don't know what kind of training they had. You don't know what kind of experience they have. Vicarious liability. The listing firm or the seller could be held responsible for the seller subagent's actions or inactions. I'm going to tell you guys, seller subagency is rare. Most buyers choose to be represented. But is it possible? Is it possible for a buyer to say, no, I don't need represented? We give them those choices. We have their discussion with them. We're going to talk about that tonight when we get into agency disclosure. As an example, it was a home that my father-in-law had owned. He owned it, I listed it. And we had an investor come in wanting to make an offer and go through with it. The investor buys and sells houses every day. That's part of his job. The investor didn't need representation. He didn't need an agent, right? He just needed access into the door. He just needed to get to the closing table. So an investor might be an example where a buyer chooses not to be represented. We're going to give them choices. We're going to give them options. Again, we'll talk about that in just a minute with our disclosure, our agency disclosure. So 2 forms of subagency. One of you get a listing, the rest of you are subagents, you're an agent of an agent. The other form of seller subagency, you bring your buyer customer to the table. You're a seller subagent. You're acting as an agent of the seller, bringing the buyer customer. You're going to get them through the transaction. You'll get paid. If you're allowed to bring a buyer customer, you'll get paid. When you look in MLS, when your buyer customer calls you and says, I want to see 123 Main Street, you look in MLS, we see things in MLS that you guys don't see on like Zillow and Realtor.com. And one thing we see when we look in MLS is the type of agency relationship that this firm, this listing firm allows. So it'll say either seller subagency, buyer agency, or both. So if it says buyer's agents only, and you're acting as a seller subagent, you can't show that property. They're saying right there, they're not letting you in. Questions?
Julie, do you mind giving the seller subagency like an example? Like if you were at an open house, this person would be representing the seller, but they told the buyer to come. Like how
I
would
mean,
that
showing
look?
the property is one thing, right? Let's talk about going and presenting an offer and going under contract, right? You can look at property all day long, right? But now that you're presenting an offer, so you have a listing, so the seller's your client, okay? Let's say you and I work for two different firms. You made a bad choice. You leave Julie's real estate shop and you go work for another firm, okay? You have the listing. I bring the buyer customer. You allow seller subagency. It's your listing. You allow seller subagency. My buyer doesn't want to be represented for whatever reason. So I bring my buyer as a customer. My role is that of a seller subagent. I'm an agent of the seller. I can't be an agent of the buyer because they're not my client. I have to have if I want to get paid, I have to have a reason in this transaction. I have to have a role. And if my buyer says, no, I don't want to hire you, I just need somebody to get me in the front door, access into the property, I would be a seller subagent bringing my buyer customer. Again, it
So it's
has to
not
tell
the
you in MLS
firm, but the
that's allowed.
seller.
I'm sorry, what?
It's not the firm, but it's the seller.
Correct. You're a seller's subagent. You're an agent of the seller. The buyer is just a customer. I'm not a buyer's agent, right? If I were a buyer's agent, the buyer would be my client. So I'm not a buyer's agent. I'm a seller's subagent because the buyer's my customer. Seller subagency, talk about it on 155 of your book. We'll actually see this again in a week or so when we start looking at our offer to purchase and contract. On the offer to purchase and contract, I have to check a box that tells you my role. If my name is on the offer to purchase and contract as an agent, I got to tell you why I'm there. What's my role? What's my reasoning? Seller subagent can get paid as long as the listing firm is willing to work with the seller subagent. So again, if MLS says buyer's agent only, you're not welcome. You and your buyer customer are not welcome. Thus, you wouldn't get paid. So you're not allowed to show the property. You're not allowed to bring the offer. The seller and the listing firm have refused seller subagency. And again, I'm being honest. It's rare to see seller subagency. Why? Because of this vicarious liability. Yeah, Clara?
Okay, but so what if the house that your buyer really, really wants falls under those conditions? What do you do then?
I try to get them to hire me,
Okay,
right? Like,
right.
look, you're the one that said you didn't want to hire me. So now you say you don't want to see this, you want to see this house? You know, again, we're having these discussions up front, and we're going to talk about disclosure in just a minute. So hopefully if we're doing our job, we're explaining agency. And by the time we're done, the buyer's going, oh gosh, where do I sign? Why wouldn't I want to hire you? And truthfully, most buyers are all about being represented. I mean, think about it. If you're buying a house, how's the idea feel of being unrepresented? Not cool, right? So that's part of our agency disclosure. Really? You don't want to hire me? You want to be represented? I can get you in first class. I can move you from coach to first class if you just choose to be represented. But again, I think an investor is the absolute best example of a buyer that may choose to be unrepresented. They don't want to go through all the agency stuff. They just want to buy a house, flip it, and sell it, right? This is what they do every day. Any other questions about seller sub-agency? Okay. Working with our disclosure, working with real estate agent. We're getting there in just a minute. Yep. We have to have discussions. We have to have discussions about creating relationships. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay. We're going to talk about the next type of agency relationship. Give me time to talk. I'm going to ask that you guys please hold all of your questions until I'm done, because it's a very good chance, if you let me say what I have to say, it's a very good chance I'll answer your questions. So I promise you, I will give time for questions when I'm done. Okay, I'd rather you guys listen than typing in the chat. Everybody good with that? Is that fair? So give me a chance to say what I have to say, and then I'll open it up for discussion. Another form of agency relationship is something called dual agency. Dual agency is an in-house transaction, which means the seller and the buyer are represented by the same firm. In dual agency, you have one firm and two clients. Firm ABC represents the seller and selling 123 Main Street. Firm ABC represents the buyer and buying 123 Main Street. Dual agency may be one agent within the firm. It might be two agents within the firm. You can have one agent working with the buyer and the seller. You can have two agents, one working with the buyer, one working with the seller. The key here is that they're both represented by the same firm. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent. Write that down. Write it down again. Write it down again tonight. Write it down again tomorrow morning. Write it down next Monday. Write that down. Dual agency is intentionally created, which means dual agency doesn't just happen. Dual agency is created on purpose. And it's created with informed written consent of both parties, both seller and buyer. Informed written consent. Does that mean I'm going to say, seller, we're going to do dual agency, just sign here? Or am I going to have a discussion with them? Am I going to explain to them what dual agency is about? Informed written consent. Let's talk this through for a second. Dual agency is not what's in the best interest for the buyer and the seller. Think about it. What are we to say I owe my client? I owe my clients old car. Yeah, I owe them old car. And now all of a sudden in one transaction, remember our law of agency? Now all of a sudden in one transaction, I'm serving two kings. I owe two parties the same equal treatment, the same old car. Goodness, did this just get tricky? How do you treat two kings equally, fairly, and the same? When dual agency, the agent's role changes. In dual agency, we cannot be advocates. We cannot offer advice to our buyers and sellers. There is no advice that I could offer one party that isn't going to harm the other. When the buyer says, I want to make an offer, how much should I offer? If I say under asking price, I've harmed my seller. If I say at asking price, I've possibly harmed my buyer, right? When the buyer says, should I get a home inspection? I can't answer yes or no without harming either party. And as a dual agent, I have equal loyalty, equal obligations to both. Where are my football fans? Let's talk football for a minute. Even if you're not a football fan, you can follow along, don't worry. When you watch a football game, is it clear that there are two different teams on the field? You have a home team and an away team, right? In a real estate transaction, you have two teams. You have the seller and the buyer, right? So you got two teams on the field. If we weren't in dual agency, the listing agent would be the coach for the seller. The buyer's agent would be the coach for the buyer. So the coaches are standing off on the sidelines, make this offer, get a home inspection, right? They're shouting advice to their clients. When we enter into dual agency, the seller's still selling and the buyer's still buying. Their roles haven't changed. When we enter into dual agency, it's my role that changes. In dual agency, I can't be a coach. In dual agency, I become the referee. Is the referee still an important part of the game? Yeah. Is the referee still making sure everybody gets through the game, following the rules and doing everything that they're supposed to? Yeah. Is the referee telling Cam what play to make next? Probably not. They wouldn't be reffing for too long, would they? The referee can't tell the players, they can't give advice, they can't tell them what to do. In dual agency, it's my role that changes, not the players. And this is why we have to have this conversation. Let's go back to intentionally created with informed written consent. I have to have these conversations with my buyers and sellers before we get here. So let's talk this through. You're at a listing appointment. You're going over the listing agreement with the seller. You get to the part in your listing agreement about dual agency. You tell the seller, if you agree to dual, you're giving up my advocacy. I cannot offer you advice in dual. And the seller says, that makes no sense to me. Why in the world did I hire you if you can't give me advice? Does that sound like good news to the seller? Does that sound like something they're like, oh boy, that sounds great? Probably not. The seller says, no, I'm not doing dual agency. No, I'm not doing it. That's your choice. Seller needs to understand, if they say no to dual agency, they're not allowing any agent in my firm to bring their buyer client. If they say no to dual agency, they're limiting the buyers that can view their property. And we explain this to them. That's your right. You don't have to agree to dual. But if you say no, what if I was remember said something earlier about a firm with 500 agents? That's 500 agents that could have a buyer client. If you say no, I can't let them in the front door because you won't allow dual agency. Flip that coin. You're working with a buyer client. Your firm puts a new listing on the market that your buyer client goes, ooh, that's nice. I want to see it tomorrow. Your firm listed it, so you know the seller's a client. And you look at the buyer and you have the dual agency discussion. And they say, no, the whole reason I hired you is to be my advocate. I don't want to do dual agency. All right, then buyer, I'm sorry. I can't show you that listing tomorrow. If they say no to dual, they're limiting their options. Dual agency, sometimes I just gave the example of firms with like 500 agents. All you need in dual agency is one broker. All you need for dual agency is one listing. Dual agency is really just a phone call away. If there's a for sale sign in my seller's front yard, that for sale sign is going to, in addition to the firm's name, but it's going to have my name and my phone number on it. Why? Because I want buyers to call me, right? So buyer calls me off my listing. They say, I want to be presented and I want to see this property. Okay. I can only show it to you if my seller has already agreed to dual and if you agree to dual. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent. In dual agency, the firm represents both the buyer and the seller with equal loyalty in the same transaction. We have to have this discussion. We have to have written permission of all parties before we do it. And we have to act in such a way that we're not compromising either principle. I'm serving two kings. The firm is serving two kings. Maybe it's one agent, maybe it's two. Some firms have multiple locations. They might have a Greensboro branch, a Charlotte branch, and maybe a Lexington branch. They're all still with the same firm. So if an agent from the Charlotte office lists it and an agent from the Lexington office brings the buyer, it's still dual because they're still in the same firm. So rooftop doesn't matter. It's the umbrella of the firm. We mentioned this last night when we were talking about conflicts of interest. Undisclosed dual agency is never allowed. Why? Because if we're in dual agency, we have to have informed written consent. We have to have a conversation with the seller about dual agency, about my advocacy going away. We have to have a conversation with the buyer about dual agency, about my advocacy going away. We have to have both of their permission. I agree to dual agency or I do not agree to dual agency is built into both of our listing agreement and our buyer's agency agreement. Thank you, Forms Committee, for putting it all together. So when we're with the seller, going over the listing agreement, we can at that time have a conversation about dual agency. With the seller, I need to know before I list the property if they allow dual or not. Because as soon as I activate it in MLS, buyers want to start scheduling showings, especially in this market. So I need to know before I activate it what the seller, if the seller allows it. Buyers, maybe I don't talk to them until they're interested in one of my listings. We'll talk more about working with buyers and sellers in Unit 8. What we need, what is required, is disclosed dual agency. It's purposely created with informed written consent. And even though we're in dual, there's still certain confidential about the other party that I can't share. So I do still owe personal confidential information. Just because I'm in dual doesn't mean I can call my seller and tell them why my buyer's buying, their motivation for buying, or how low they're willing to go, right? There's still certain confidential information that I'm not going to share. Even in dual, I have a duty to disclose material facts. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. If I'm the seller's agent, if I'm the buyer's agent, or if I'm a dual agent, I always disclose material facts. I know this doesn't set well with you guys. I hear what you're saying. You guys, I love your introductions. I love getting your introductions. And a lot of you tell me, I want to help people. I want to help people find their dream and find their house. And now I'm standing here babbling on about times that you may not be able to help them like you thought you could. I have a possible solution to dual agency. So bear with me. Hang on just for 1 second. We might be able to make this a little easier. Again, buyers and sellers don't like it. That's why we have to have this informed written consent. We have to have their permission to take a few steps back. We have to have their permission for me to stop being their coach and to start being their referee. Questions on dual?
Hey, Julie.
Hey.
Best practice. What's best practice when you're faced with dual agency? I know that firm wants to retain as much revenue as possible, but from a best practice perspective, in effort to avoid conflicts of interest, would it make sense that they would assign multiple agents, one to represent the buyer and one to represent the seller?
They can, because dual can be one agent, can be two, but remember, the relationship is between the seller and who?
And the firm.
The firm.
Correct.
It's the relationship between the buyer and who? The firm.
Right.
So
Right.
even if you have one agent or two agents, we all still work for the same firm.
Correct, but wouldn't there still be some inherent bias if you just had a single agent representing both clients in that situation? So would it not make sense to have, despite the fact being with the contract being with the firm, wouldn't it make better sense to just have multiple agents, one representing either client?
That's kind of where I'm heading next. So
Oh,
that's my
sorry.
possible.
I didn't
So
realize
hang
that.
on. That's exactly where you're heading. So hang on to that just for 1 second. So let's
Okay,
do
sorry.
this and then we'll possible solution. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I
Clara,
got ahead of you. That's fair enough.
I like where you're thinking.
Yeah,
You're heading in the right direction.
My husband and I have bought and sold maybe 3 houses, and I'm pretty sure that at least one of them, the buyer also was affiliated with the same firm. But I have no recollection of my real estate agent, other than maybe we checked the block explaining it to the degree you just did.
Remember what we said on day one. What are you going to do with your personal experience?
True. Okay, good point.
Okay, because I'm not here to tell you if your agent was right or wrong. I'm here to tell you what license law and commission rule says. I'm here to tell you what you're going to be tested on. So
Right.
A lot of people on this call may have an experience where they're going, wow, this is brand new information. Take your personal experience for the next couple months and chuck it off to the side. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. What I'm saying is what the real estate commission says.
Yeah, no, I wasn't, I didn't doubt the information you're presenting, nor do I.
And I appreciate, and I understand your confusion.
Yeah,
I do.
I was just confused, but.
And I understand it.
Okay, good, got it.
Dual agency, intentionally created with informed written consent. I think Darian asked about possible solutions. One thing that we could do, how do we, guide our clients through this transaction when we can't give them advice? This is part of the beauty of the listing appointment, the buyer consultation. Can't you tell your buyer before dual agency, when we go under contract, you're going to want to get a home inspection, right? When we go under contract, you're going to want to get a survey. Can't you tell your seller, when we present an offer, you're going to want to look at all the terms. You want to consider everything. We can trying to have some of these conversations up front, and we're encouraged to. I can talk all day long until I get into dual agency. Once I get into dual agency, I got to take some few steps back. I stop being the coach. I start being the referee. So what's the possible solution to dual agency? Let's take dual agency one step further. And let's introduce something called designated dual agency. Designated, I don't like to sneeze on camera. Designated dual agency is a form of dual agency. In order to have designated dual agency, we have to have consent to dual. Do I have everybody so far? If either party says no to dual, designated is not an option. In order for the firm to offer designated dual agency, they have to have a written company policy in place about how they're going to practice designated dual agency. Let's look at a picture. Let's pretend that this is a wall. The firm and all the agents are straddling the wall. The buyer is on one side of the wall. The seller is on the other side of the wall. This is dual agency. The firm and all the agents are straddling the wall. Is it clear that there's a division between the buyer and the seller? There's a wall between them. So the firm and all the agents are sitting there straddling the wall. This is dual agency. In the event of designated dual agency, the broker in charge kicks one agent off the wall. They designate one agent in the firm to work exclusively with the buyer. And then the broker in charge kicks a different agent off the wall to work exclusively with the seller. Designated dual agency is always two agents. Dual can be one, dual can be two. Designated is always two. Once these agents have been kicked off the wall, where's the firm and the rest of the agents? They remain in dual. They're still in dual. They're still straddling the wall, right? So one agent has been designated to work exclusively with the buyer. A different agent has been designated to work exclusively with the seller. Now that these two have been designated, these two agents might as well proceed as if they were with two different firms. These two agents go from coach to referee to coach. The firm is still a referee, right? The firm's still straddling the wall. Just make you feel a little bit better about dual agency? Usually. Now our sellers and buyers have advocacy again. Now, when my buyer client says, how much can I offer? I can say, oh, well, let's look at the numbers and let's have a conversation about it. I can have a discussion with them. When my buyer says, should I get a home inspection? Yeah, you should get a home inspection. I've been designated to work exclusively with one with the buyer, one with the seller. Designated is always two agents. Agents cannot be designated if they have prior confidential information about the other party. So the broker in charge is going to go to the agent that's been working with the buyer. And they say, do you know anything about my seller that can harm them in this transaction? Buyer's agent says no. BIC says, great, I designate you to work with my buyer. Then the broker in charge goes to the agent that's been working with the seller. They say, do you know anything about my buyer that can harm them in this transaction? Seller's agent says, yeah, our kids play soccer together. We go to Sunday school together. You know, could it stand to reason that they may know something about why they want to buy, or what their motive is, or their reasoning for buying? Could that be very feasible, very likely, based on their relationship? Sure. If an agent has prior confidential information about the other party, they can't be designated. So now the BIC says, all right, I need to find somebody else to work with my seller. I'll get you a referral fee, but I need to find somebody else that I can designate, somebody else that I can kick off the wall to work exclusively with my seller that doesn't have prior confidential information about the other party. The caveats of designated. Again, the agent cannot be designated if they've received confidential information on the opposite party. Again, the BIC asks. The BIC just asks, do you know something about the other side that could harm? Remember, it's the firm's client. Don't you harm my client. The other caveat to designated dual agency, and this is the biggest problem topic in Unit 7, I promise you. Provisional, or PB, is provisional broker. Provisional broker is you guys once you get your license. You're going to affiliate with a firm and you're going to have a broker in charge. As a provisional broker, when you're affiliated with a broker in charge, your broker in charge is going to be in your back pocket. They're going to be with you through transactions. They're going to be helping you, get through your first couple of deals. Guys, they're not just going to hand you a license and let you run amok on the street, right? They're going to require you to have supervision. So because of the very nature of the relationship of the provisional broker and the broker in charge, those two can't be designated opposite of each other. Because if the broker in charge is doing their job, they should know something about the other party. They should know. They may have even been at the listing appointment when the provisional broker went, right? They are in your back pocket. So because of their relationship, they should know something about the provisional broker's client. And for that reason, this relationship can never happen. Any other combination for designated dual agency is allowed, as long as either party, broker, as long as either party doesn't have prior confidential information about the opposite side, about the other party. PB can be designated opposite of PB as long as they don't have confidential information about the other side. This rule about PB can't be designated opposite a broker, this is only for designated dual agency. A PB and a BIC can be in dual together. They can be dual. They cannot be designated. Questions? What happens you got the buyer and the agent on one side, you got the seller and the agent on the other. The firm and all the other agents remain in dual, right? This is our designated. The firm and all the agents are straddling the wall. One agent has been kicked off to work exclusively with the buyer. A different agent has been kicked off to work exclusively with the seller. The reason they were kicked off the wall, the reason they were designated, is because they did not have prior confidential information about the other party. What if, once they're designated, they learn something about the other party? Now that they're designated, when they learn something about the other party, don't they have a duty to their client to share that information? Don't they have an obligation? There's a huge reason why agents shouldn't run around the office chit-chatting about their clients. First off, you couldn't be designated if you engaged in water cooler gossip. You can't be designated. I mean, it's one thing for me to tell you I have a house for sale, but it's something else for me to tell you why they're selling. If you know my seller's motivation for selling, you know something that could harm them. Shouldn't you go to your buyer and say, look, I know the reason they're selling is because they're going through a nasty divorce and they got to unload this as soon as they can, right? So once you're designated, if you learn something confidential about the other side, you owe that to your client to share that with them. We're going to take a break. We come back. We're going to talk more about dual and designated. Y'all form your questions. I know you're taking it all in. So let's take 10. We come back. I got more to say. All right. Do we come back? Where's Darian? No. All of us came back. Okay. Let me take attendance. What questions do we have? Dual agency, designated agency. I can't have designated without dual. In order, actually, before I do this, let's do this. Before we can have designated agency, we have to have consent to dual agency. Designated, we're going to already look at a few points. Before I go back in the PowerPoint, it was just, you flashed at the same, we came on at the same time, Sarah, but I got you. Thank you. One thing we're going to do next week is start looking at your agency agreements. And you can, I'm going to ask you guys to look ahead anyway. So Unit 8, and you have agency agreements in your textbook. The problem is those agency agreements are expired. They're old. So when we look at any form in this class, I always want you guys coming to Learn, Test, Pass. That's one promise I have to you, is I will always have the current form and Learn, Test, Pass. Drives me nuts that they print these forms in the textbook, because I swear as soon as they produce the new textbook, the forms expire and they're obsolete. Neither here nor there. So in Learn, Test, Pass under the Unit 8 material, we're going to look at we got our listing agreement, our exclusive right to sell listing agreement, and our buyer agency agreement. So we're going to look at this next week. But if you guys are looking ahead, one thing that you may want to do this weekend to help yourself understand, dual agency is in both agency agreements. So in the buyer's agency agreement, we got dual agency as it's explained to the buyer. In the listing agreement, we got dual agency as it applies to the seller. But what I want to just point out right now, this informed written consent, and Claire, this is what you were talking about. You checked the box. We have to have authorization for dual agency. So either the buyer authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or the buyer desires exclusive representation at all time and does not authorize the firm to act as a dual agent. This is where we have to explain it to the client, and they have to select one or the other. If they say yes to dual, then we can break out the option of designated. And you're going to see something very similar on the listing agreement. But I think this will help because it's as explained to the buyer, as explained to the seller. So I think this helps you guys in understanding as well. Back in my admin days, I used to do new agent training. So I got you guys as soon as you got licensed. You join my firm, you'd spend time with me, we'd help get you started. And one of the more common concerns I heard from brand new agents was, I don't know what to say. What do I say when I'm looking at a seller? How do I explain dual agency to a seller? And my thinking was always, let the forms help put words in your mouth. Use the forms to help you have these conversations. I don't want you to sit down and read to the buyer or read to the seller. That doesn't do them any good. But why recreate the wheel when you already have this information at your disposal? So I think that's a big advantage to being familiar with the forms and knowing what the forms say, because you can use them. You can use them to help put words in your mouth. So I just point this out again. We're going here next week and we'll see it. But the exclusive right to sell listing agreement and the exclusive buyer agency agreement are both in Learn, Test, Pass under the Unit 8 material. Questions, comments? Again, dual agency is a phone call away. All you need is one listing. You need one buyer to call off that one listing, one buyer that says, I need representation and I'm interested in your listing. Designated, it's a good solution for the sellers and the buyers. It gives them back that advocacy. If the firm offers it, I'm going to go back for 1 second. The firm has to provide it. They have to have this written company policy in place on how they're going to do it. If I were a one-man show, for example, I couldn't offer dual or designated agency, could I? Because I need 2 agents. So if I was a sole practitioner, designated wouldn't be an option, right? I could do dual, but I couldn't offer designated because it's just me. If there's only 3 of us in the firm, we may not be able to do designated because we may all work together and know what's going on, right? So it may be the firm's policy. I think if most firms can choose to do it, they will, because it's better for the clients. It's better for the buyer and the seller to have that advocacy. So let's look at some key points. We'll go back through your book and pull out a few things, but I'm at the bottom of page 163. So let's just talk about some key points. Again, when you go into designated, dual agency is not eliminated. Designated is a form of dual. So 2 agents are designated, everybody else remains in dual. The firm and all the other agents remain in dual. Dual only happens for in-house transactions. Again, the absolute simplest definition of dual I can do is one firm, one transaction, and 2 clients. That's the simplest I can do it. So if you have a buyer or seller coming from another firm, you don't have dual, right? Because it's not an in-house transaction, it's a cooperating transaction. What if the seller is my client and the buyer is my customer? The buyer says, no, I don't need representation. I'll be your customer. Do we have dual? No, because for dual, I need 2 clients. So if I have 1 client and 1 customer, I don't have dual. When do I have dual? 2 clients, both interested in the same house, both represented by the same firm. I got both of them in first class now, don't I? Remember my plane? I got seller and buyer in first class. There's nobody back in coach. Coach is empty. Everybody's getting champagne and a warm towel. They're all sitting in first class. We have to have written approval of both parties, no later than the time that we're ready to make the first offer. We'll talk more about this in just a minute. I have to have written approval of both parties. Seller has to agree to it and the buyer has to agree to it. No later than making the first offer. Again, we'll talk about written agency agreement when we get into Unit 8. I said just a minute, that was a lie. Next week, when we get into Unit 8, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, Alicia?
So it says dual agency is not eliminated, merely a form of dual agency. Is that supposed to be designated? It's not eliminated?
Yeah, so when you go into designated, dual does not go away.
Okay.
Okay,
Gotcha.
yep. So when you enter into designated, dual just doesn't poof, disappear, right? 2 agents are designated, everybody else remains in dual. And designated is a form of dual. So if either party says no to dual, then designate is not an option. Okay, I got to have 2 thumbs up for dual. Now, what if they say no to dual and then you say, well, let me tell you something. Let me explain designated to you. And they say, oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad, right? So maybe I can change their mind before their hard no. That's part of our job, you guys, is to help educate the public. We need to tell our buyers and sellers, if you agree to do this, this is what you're giving up. This is what it looks like. I'm still getting you through the transaction. I'm still flying the plane. I'm still involved in the game. Please don't think I'm going away. I'm still getting a paycheck. Please don't think I'm going away. I just can no longer offer you that advocacy. So it's only going to come up in in-house transactions. We'll talk more about this written approval, a little bit tonight, and then more in Unit 8 next week. Individual designated dual agents will only act as an agent for a principal when they're designated. You can only act exclusively for one client in an in-house situation when you've been kicked off the wall, when you've been designated. So one agent works exclusively with the seller. A different agent works exclusively with the buyer. Once those two agents have been designated, like they proceed as with, they might as well be with two different firms. And again, the firm has to have a comprehensive company policy on how they're going to practice designated. The BIC has to have in their policy how they're going to find out if you have confidential information. They should be asking you, do you know anything about my seller that can harm them? Do you know anything about my buyer that can harm them? So that's what the company policy for the firm is about. Yes, we'll practice designated, and this is how we're going to do it. You know, it used to be back in the day before e-files, e-documents, we had, gosh, when I started 21 years ago, we had the file room. Anybody old enough to remember the file room? It was a room jam-packed full of file cabinets. And you know what went in the file room? All the paperwork, everything. And one thing when we had the file room that the BIC needed to be sure of was that access to the file room was limited. Because I didn't need agents coming in the middle of the night flipping through somebody else's file, right? So it needed to be locked. Who has keys? Who has access to the file room? Now today we have e-documents and you couldn't get my file if you wanted to. So we do have a little bit more security. That's not saying there's still not folders laying around the office, right? There's still not information in the BIC's office, for example. The broker cannot be appointed as designated dual agent for one party if that broker's already received confidential information. Again, that's part of the BIC's job, is to make sure. Listing agent, do you know anything about my buyer? Buyer's agent, do you know anything about my seller? That's part of the BIC's responsibility to make sure that their clients are protected. Because everybody's still in an agency relationship with who? With the firm. And as we said, the broker in charge absolutely cannot be designated opposite of a provisional broker. Any other type of relationship is allowed as long as they haven't received confidential information about the other side. Page, let's see, a couple things point out. You know, your book, there's some good stuff. Dual agency, you start talking about 156 with some examples. Designated dual agency. I want you guys to spend time with dual and designated this weekend. I want you to spend time in your book. Over on page 162, 163, there's some scenarios. Again, we're going to start getting into when is oral okay? When does it have to be in writing? So we'll get there. If I don't get, I'll get to a little bit of it tonight, but we'll get into oral and writing next, or in writing next week. Also, if you guys will turn with me in the back of your book to page page 716. Remember last night I introduced you guys to Appendix A? And we talked about just getting you to focus on the comments that start on page 707. So on 716, the second column, there's the law and rule comments on agency agreements and disclosure, which we're talking about. Over on page 718, there's consent to dual agency. There's dual agency status of a firm. Designated dual agencies on 719. You guys seeing this? So we're giving you a couple different places to get this information. We're giving you a couple different places to get that to get those resources. So you got Unit 7. Excuse me. We'll see it again in Unit 8. And then we'll talk about it again when we get to license law and commission rule at the very end. So I got a question then. If you were in a small town with only one firm that has a couple of brokers, they may not be able to offer designated, right? They may not have that option. And that's why there's got to be a policy in place if you're going to do it, how you're going to do it. So yeah, everybody knows everybody's business in small town USA, don't they? What did you have for lunch today? Everybody knows it. So we may not be able to offer designated in small town USA. And that's why not all firms practice it. Anything else? Not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. You guys are awfully quiet tonight. When you think of questions later, please reach out to me. You will be tested on dual and designated. And as you're studying this weekend, when you think of something, please reach out to me. Danielle's taking it all in, perfect. Once it, Denise too, good. Once it starts marinating a little bit, you're gonna go, huh? You got your book, you got the recording, you got me. Fair enough? Yes, John, that's what I said, but I also allotted time for questions on dual and designated. Didn't mean to put that fear in you.
Julie, so I do have a question actually.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome. So when it comes down to that agency, when it comes down to dual agency, you said that we don't give old car, right? Or we give certain parts of old car.
No. Our clients always get old car. So even if I have two clients, they still get old car. What they don't get in dual is my advice. I can't advocate. I can't favor one party over the other. And that's the big part of my role that changes. I stop being on the sidelines shouting as a coach, and I move on as a referee. Both of them are still in first class. They both still get old car, but I can't offer advice in dual.
So how does disclosure look in that type of relationship? Do you still give the disclosure if you find out that information because you owe it to your client? Or do you kind of
what kind of disclosure? What kind of disclosure?
So let's say, for instance, you know that they're going to sell 50,000 below asking price, you know, and you just so happen you get that information. Do you go ahead and disclose that information? Since you're
even
working
in
with both?
dual, I can't disclose certain confidential information about one party to the other. So just because I'm in dual, I don't have the right to say, hey, buyer, let me tell you something about my seller, right? I still owe them confidentiality. Okay. I still owe them material facts, the disclosure material facts. Okay, so I'm again, it doesn't give me the right to say, I got something to tell you, right? I always have to disclose material facts, but I'm not gonna gossip. That's the best way I know how to put it. I'm not gonna tell my buyer something about my seller. I'm not gonna tell my seller something about my buyer. I mean, that would just not be cool, you know? So
That's when
definitely
your
want to be
morality
cool.
comes in.
Right, right. So, you know, we're helping them through it, but we're still respecting them, for goodness sakes, you know? Lexi?
I have a question, Julie. So what happens when you have an individual that's a buyer and a seller? Like I want to look into buying a house, but I'm also looking into selling my house. So how would you handle that situation?
That's a great question. And that's not dual because that's two transactions.
Okay, got you.
The seller is selling 1-2, or the person is the seller in 1-2-3 Main Street, but they're the buyer in 4-5-6 Elm Street.
Okay, got
So
you.
it's two different transactions. Can I help both? Oh, you betcha. But it's two different transactions. Good question. Okay. I'm here all weekend. Okay. And again, we'll see this. We'll see this again. We'll spend some more time with it as we go on. I mean, you see it twice in your book. So it's one of those things that hopefully, where's your little red flag? Your little flag went up and go, wow, it's in the book twice. This must be important. Okay. One more type of agency relationship, just to mention real quick, are rentals, rental relationships. In rental relationships, the owner hires the property manager to manage their property. Now I got a whole unit. Unit 12 is dedicated to property management. So we'll talk a lot more about that then. Typically, the owner hires the property manager. That makes the landlord their client. It's rare in a residential transaction for a tenant to be represented. Commercial might be a little bit different. But typically what we see in a residential transaction, the landlord is the client, the tenant is the customers. Dual agency in property management is really rare. Again, probably going to happen more in commercial, but truth be told, in commercial is so complicated. There's many more pieces involved with commercial, and each party wants their own representation. Okay. The last major section of unit, actually, before I move on, everybody just stop for a second. Let's take a few big deep breaths. I'm going to stop sharing. I meant to do this when we started and I forgot. So this is why I have my notes. So I looked at my note and said, uh-oh, I didn't do it. I want to make sure that we're all good. We're all on the same page. We talked about OLCAR. We owe those clients OLCAR. Everybody good with that? Your client gets OLCAR. Your customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. Everybody good? It's important that we understand that you owe all of your clients OLCAR. Price point doesn't matter. As long as they hire you, you owe them OLCAR. So if they hire you to help them purchase a $5,000 lot, you owe them OLCAR. If they hire you to help them sell their $1 million home, you owe them OLCAR. Are you going to get more selling the $1 million home than you are the $5,000 lot? Well, yeah. But price point doesn't matter. They get OLCAR if they hire you. And I know we talked last night, we talked about taking that one client and treating them really good and taking good care of them. And then they tell their family and friends, and then they tell their family and friends, and so on and so on. And that's how you grow your business. Guys, please understand, real estate is a people industry. We sell houses, but we're a people industry. If you are coming into this industry led by dollar signs, you might be setting yourself up for failure. Trust me. When you take care of the people, the money will follow. But if you come in that's all about me, and how much money am I going to make, and da, you're setting yourself up for failure, because you're not going to treat these people good, because you're only worried about the dollar signs. Does that make sense? So it's a people industry. We take care of the people. Word of mouth is everything. I know we talked about this last night. Good reviews, bad reviews, that can make or break you. It doesn't take much to put a bad review out on you on the internet, right? Doesn't take much to go on, name a social media platform and say, my agent treated me horribly. It's going to be hard to come back from that. So please keep that in mind, that this is a people industry. Again, I'm coming up on 21 years, and I've known a lot of top producers over the years, a lot of top producers over the years. And I'll share with you guys, in watching my top producers over the years, there's two things that I noticed that they always do. Two traits that I've noticed of top producers. One, they're always learning. They're always getting training. They're learning the newest technology. They're up to date on the forms. They're up to date on the current rules, the current laws. They're almost always sitting in a classroom trying to improve themselves, trying to grow their business. You never stop learning. And the second thing I always notice my top producers doing is they're constantly feeding their pipeline. They're constantly prospecting for new clients. They're constantly bringing new clients in. It's so easy. If you have 9 things under contract right now, it's so easy to not be prospecting. But what happens when those 9 things close? You're starting all over, right? You're starting all over trying to get business. There's a misconception in this industry that we're feast or famine. And as long as you're feeding your pipeline, you can maintain a steady stream of income. So even once you get somebody under contract, keep feeding that pipeline, so somebody's always coming out, people in, people out. So again, I just want to share that with you guys. Questions or comments on that? Okay. So the next to last section in Unit 7, the next big section in Unit 7 is on agency disclosure. I owe it to the consumer to disclose my agency status. And I disclose my agency status with something called the Working with Real Estate Agent disclosure. We'll look at this in just a second. We're going to talk about it and then we'll look at it. The Working with Real Estate Agency disclosure is mandatory for all sales transactions. Let me tell you how they like to trick you on your test. Does this say lease transactions? Does this say all real estate transactions? This only says sales transactions. Residential sales, commercial sales. So the Working with Real Estate Agent disclosure is required in residential sales and commercial sales. And the rule requires us to give and review this Working with Real Estate Agent disclosure at something called first substantial contact. I will talk more about first substantial contact in just a minute. Basically, first substantial contact is that moment in time when the conversation switches gears from the property to the people. I can talk about the property all day long. When I start getting any kind of information about the seller, when I start asking the buyer any conversation, why are you buying? Why are you selling? What's your price point? We've switched gears to that first substantial contact. Again, I'll talk more about first substantial contact in just a second. We keep the signed disclosure in our transaction file for 3 years. How long do we keep all documents? 3 years. And the working with real estate agent disclosure is no different. So we'll keep it for 3 years. The point of the working with real estate agent disclosure is to ensure that the customer knows, one, what side am I on? Am I on the seller side or am I on the buyer side? Don't let them assume. Don't let them assume who you represent. We have to tell them who I represent. And the big thing that this disclosure does is it tells the consumer, I do not owe you confidentiality until you hire me. If you don't hire me, I don't owe you confidentiality. Remember, old car, I only owe you confidentiality when you enter into an agency agreement with me. And the consumer has the right to know that. They have the right to know that I don't owe you that confidentiality. I have a duty to my client to share what you told me until you decide to hire me. Guys, I'm here to tell you, people talk. It blows my mind. It blows my mind how quick people are to talk. We always have to be on alert for first substantial contact. I've had to interrupt people before. Please stop talking. I don't want to be rude. I don't want to interrupt. But you need to understand that what you're telling me, I have a duty to take to my client. I have a duty to share to my client. I'm in a relationship with them. I told them that I would. Let's say, for example, I'm doing an open house on Sunday. And a buyer comes into my open house and they say, hey, welcome, have a look around. Let me know if you have any questions. And they look around and and they leave and they say, this was really nice, Julie. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Did I learn anything about the buyer whatsoever? Maybe I know their name. Maybe I know their names are, John and Bob or whatever, right? But I don't know anything personal, but I don't know anything about their price. I don't know anything about their motive for buying. I had no reason to do working with real estate agent disclosure. What if they come into my open house and just start talking? We're super serious buyers and we got to buy as soon as possible. And this is our price point. And we're pre-approved for X amount. Whoa. We've hit first substantial contact. It's my job to be on alert. It's my job to pay attention. It's my job to protect the consumer, to caution the consumer. But what you tell me is just as good as communicating directly with my client. I think of working with real estate agent disclosure as the consumer's Miranda rights. And what do part of the Miranda rights say? Anything you say can be held against you. So we have to Mirandarize them. It's a word now. We have to Mirandarize them. We have to warn them. And guys, anytime you're in an agent capacity, you need to be on alert for first substantial contact. I just gave the example of the open house. I had a listing a couple years ago, and my real estate team, we have a central phone number. So one of my teammates was on phones that day, and she answered the phone, and it was a lady calling about my listing. My teammate answered the phone. Thank you for calling. How may I help you? And the lady said, I'm pre-approved for $150,000 and I'm interested in your property on 123 Main Street. We didn't even know her name yet. Did I have information that could harm her? What if she brought an offer under 150? What would I have to tell my seller? I'd have to tell my seller, I know for a fact that they're pre-approved for 150. Let's counter. She hurt herself before she ever told us her name. And I know what she was doing. I know what she was doing. She was proving to us that she was a serious buyer. But in just talking, she could have harmed us. And my teammates said, whoa, 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 stop talking. First off, what's your name? And she explained this to her. And that lady said, wow, I've called several firms and nobody has explained this to me. Thank you. We gave her that Miranda warning. We gave her that, please stop talking. And anytime you're acting like an agent, you need to be prepared for people to talk. People love to talk about real estate. People love to talk about real estate. And we need to be prepared for that conversation switching from real estate to something about them personally. When you join your firm, they very well may tell you something like to wear your name badge everywhere you go. Why do they tell you to wear your name badge? So strangers will come up to you in Harris Teeter and start talking about real estate, right? Hope generate conversation. If you're wearing your name badge in Harris Teeter, don't you need to be prepared for first substantial contact in aisle 4? Because couldn't somebody come up to you and say, oh, wow, you're in real estate. I thought about selling. As a matter of fact, we were going to call an agent, but we'd really like to talk to you. People talk. It blows my mind that people talk. So can I hold questions just for 1 minute? I see a couple coming in. Let me just hold questions for 1 minute. Again, the working with real estate agent disclosure, not only does it warn them that I don't owe you confidentiality until you decide to hire me, but it's also going to introduce the consumer available to the agency options. Am I going to be a buyer's agent? Am I going to be a seller's agent? Are we going to be dual agents? Are you going to be a seller sub-agent? So we'll look at this again in just a second. So we're telling the consumers, if we proceed, if we enter into a relationship, these are our options of working together. Most of the time, first substantial contact happens face-to-face. So we gave the example of coming into my open house. Sometimes first substantial contact can happen over the phone or a website inquiry. You know, we had that lady call my teammate about my listing. Sometimes they could send you an email and say, you know, I have to sell in 2 months. Can you help me? Well, we just hit first substantial contact when I read your email, right? Because what did I learn? I learned your motivation. I learned that you have a house to sell in a short period of time. I want to sell a house is different than I have to sell in 2 months. They express their motivation. Everybody's going to tell you they want to buy or sell. Everybody's going to tell you they're going to buy or sell. The question is, are they serious? And do they need to do it in the near future? So once we give the disclosure, handing it to them again is not enough. We cannot hand it to them and say, sign here, this is what we're going to do. We give it to them and we review it with them. And the commission says at that time, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. Am I going to be your listing agent? Am I going to be your buyer's agent? Am I going to be your seller's sub-agent? We determine in what capacity we're going to work. Again, we're going to look at this disclosure in just 1 second. So first substantial contact. Again, when the conversation switches gears from the property to the person, I can't start asking you questions. What kind of house you want to buy, where you want to live, how many bedrooms you need. I can't start asking you these questions without first doing my working with real estate agent disclosure. General rule of thumb says first substantial contact happens when we get to PTM, price, term, or motive. If you're volunteering this information to me, or if I'm asking, this is considered information that I need to say, stop talking, stop talking. I have to disclose my agency status. I got like 2 more slides and then we're going to get all questions. So hang tight for 1 second. Anytime that conversation switches gears, again, we'll look at this in just a second. Agency disclosure is not a contract. Agency disclosure does not create agency. Our agency agreements are the contract. Our agency agreements create agency. The disclosure is just that. I'm disclosing my agency status. I'm disclosing to you anything you tell me. I have a duty, I have an obligation to my client to share that with them. So let's go back to the buyer that comes into my open house and they walk in the door, super motivated. We're willing to go over asking price. I got to close in 2 months. Geez, shh, stop talking. I've obviously interrupted them long before this, right? I didn't let them get that far because I'm always on alert for substantial contact. They come in and say, oh man, we're super motivated buyers. Stop. My name is Julie, working with real estate agent disclosure. You need to understand, buyer, that what you share with me, you might as well be talking directly to the seller. If you tell me you're willing to go over asking price, don't I have to take that to my seller? Don't I have to share that with my seller? The consumer needs to understand when they're communicating with me, they might as well be communicating with my seller or buyer. Because what you tell me, I have to tell them. So let's say I do my job and I go through the disclosure and we sign and everything's good. And the buyer says, so anyway, as I was saying, I have to buy right away. And this is my price point. And I'm willing to go over asking price. Once I've disclosed my status and gotten them to sign, that's my job. If they keep talking, I need to whip out my notepad, my pen, and take notes because I've already warned them. I've already told them, careful what you tell me. Once I've done my job, my duty's now to my seller, right? Like, oh, you said your price point was what? You want to buy in 2 months? Let me take note of that so I can share it with my seller. I don't have to keep warning them over and over and over again. If first substantial contact happens in person, again, you're coming to my open house or you bump into me on aisle 4 at Harris Teeter. We provide the working with real estate agent disclosure and discuss immediately. Sometimes we have to interrupt. Sometimes we do to get people to stop talking. I carry these things in my trunk, by the way. I'm always ready for first substantial contact. For what it's worth, I also have a blank offer to purchase and contract in my trunk. I have a blank listing agreement and I have a blank buyer's agency agreement. I'm not going to miss business because I don't have it. My phone doesn't work, right? I am ready to go at drop of a hat. If first substantial contact happens not in person, maybe it happens on the phone or it happens email, etc. We still have the conversation. We still discuss working with real estate agents. I have to send them the disclosure and I still have to send them the disclosure no later than 3 days. So if they call, I say, whoa, stop talking. Let me explain agency disclosure to you. I need your email address so I can send this to you. If they hit my email, I respond and say, thank you for your email. Please see attached, sign it and send it back. This is what it's about. Handing it to them is not enough. We have to review it. We have to go over it with them. Y'all want to hear a funny story before I open up for questions so far? There was a case a couple years ago, and this is a true story. One of our commissioners, one of our real estate commissioners was interested in buying a house. He and his wife went open housing. He was a genuine buyer. He walked into the open house. They struck up a conversation with the agent. He felt that they crossed the line of first substantial contact. And he looked at that agent and he said, do you have anything you need to discuss with me? And the agent said, nuh-uh. And he said, nothing you need to disclose. And the agent said, nope. And he said, no form or anything about your agency relationship. He tried 3 times to get her to do that disclosure. And finally he had to say, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm one of your real estate commissioners. Who, dear, is your broker in charge? Because we have a problem, don't we? He tried 3 times to get that. Even said, you don't have anything to disclose to me? She went, nope. That's horrible, isn't it? Okay, I got a little bit more to say and I want to share disclosure with you guys, but let's go ahead and open up for questions. I saw a couple hands. So what do we got so far?
Okay, Julie, I think you kind of answered my question, but I'm going to ask anyway, just to be sure.
Please.
Okay, so say for instance, you were, like you said, a caller or an individual calls in and say, hey, I've been pre-approved for blah, 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 this and that, third. And you knew this information prior to getting hired by your client. And say for instance, it happened on a Friday and the next day you got hired by your client on a Saturday. Are you still, how can I say it? Are you still supposed to give them old car, or that doesn't, it doesn't fall into effect because they weren't your client at that point in time?
Sure, and that's a good question. You know, because if they hire me today, I still owe them old car today, right? So if they hire me today and then somebody else, that person I met yesterday, comes forward to, you know, present an offer, who's my client today? And that's what we need to ask ourselves. So in that case, yeah, even though I heard about it before you hired me, I still know about it, right? So now I'm presenting an offer on your behalf. Anytime I'm presenting an offer on your behalf, I have a duty to tell you what I know. Anything that could affect your decision making, anything that could affect you entering into a legally binding contract with the other party, with the other side.
So if you know that they were pre-approved for that 150,000, say, hey, Lexi, I got a little secret. They were offering 150,000, or they were pre-approved. I know for a fact 150,000. You would
That's
have
right.
to disclose that because now I'm your client.
Because today you're my client, correct?
Gotcha. Okay.
Correct. Correct. I don't know what kind of household you guys grew up in, but in my house, Mama always taught me that it's rude to interrupt. My mom always said, don't interrupt people unless you know, there's no reason to interrupt, you know, da 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 da. This is like the only time that I've known my mom to be wrong. You're rude not to interrupt them, right? I'm protecting them by interrupting them. Y'all don't tell my mama I just said that, but you're rude not to interrupt them, because if I just let you keep talking, well, I don't want to be rude and interrupt, so I'm going to wait till you get to the end. How much did I just gather about you? So the rude thing is for me to let you talk. You know, when I'm doing that open house, you guys, I'm going to be really honest. When you're doing an open house, you have the listing, your name is on the side in the front yard, your name is on the advertising, your name's on all the marketing. The buyer walks into the open house and they see a name badge with your name on it. We can never let that buyer assume anything. We have to tell the buyer, I don't represent you. I don't owe you confidentiality. My loyalty is to the seller. We can't assume that they can put that together. Just because you see my name on the sign and you see me standing in the open house, I can't assume that you know that I represent the seller. I have to tell you, I'm here as a representative of the seller. Be careful what you tell me, because what you share with me, I got to tell my seller. Don't let people assume. You know what happens when you let people assume, right? No good. Danielle.
So my question, I think you might have hit on it, but for clarity, we need to make sure that this is signed by each person that we interact with as far as first substantial contact.
Correct.
So whether this is a buyer or a seller, we need to let them know what side of the fence we're on, and they need to sign this and we retain it for 3 years.
That's right. That's right. And
Okay.
it's not just so much, that's part of it. Let them know what side we're on. That's part of it. The big thing is they need to understand, I don't owe you confidentiality. That's not a service you get until you decide to hire me. Okay. So first substantial contact. Buyers come into my open house all the time and don't hit first substantial contact. Thanks, Julie. It's nice to meet you. Have a nice day. Right? You're not gonna have a relationship. How do I want to put this? Not all working with real estate agent disclosures turn into a transaction. So you're going to have signed working with real estate agent disclosures again, people that you've never, ever will see again, right? Maybe they want to show you you want to show them one property. And you say, well, let's go ahead and do working with real estate agent disclosure. So you know this is my seller. You show them the property. They say, thank you so much. Have a nice day. You guys part ways and you never, ever see them again. But we still have to keep that disclosure for 3 years. I have a e-file called, I need to set mine up for this year, but soon there will be one called WWREA 2022. And every time I get one of these signed this year, I drop it in that e-file. So I have that record. And if that person turns into a transaction, then I already have that. Then we'll enter into agency agreement.
And Julie, it doesn't matter how it's delivered. Like if I have it on the iPad and I discuss it with them and they sign it, we're done.
That's right. I can hand it to you. I can email it to you. I can send it through .loop and let you e-sign it. Let me say something else before I forget, and then we'll take a break. Can I make anybody do anything? Honestly, can I make you do anything? Sometimes somebody may look at you. I had a lady look at me once. She wanted to see my listing. She called me off my sign. I said, sure, I'll meet you there at 3 o'clock, whatever. Showed up. I just chose not to wait until first substantial contact. There's not a point that's too early. You can do it as early as you want to. It's too late when you hit first substantial contact. And I thought, if I'm showing her this listing, we very well may bump into first substantial contact. So let me go ahead and nip this in the bud when we get out of the car before we go in the front door. So I went through it. I reviewed it with her. I showed her where it says, this is not a contract. I said, please sign here. And she said, I just met you. I'm not signing anything you give me. Fair enough. I'm a shady looking character. I get it. I get it. I get it. If they refuse to sign, then we write, refuse to sign January 20th, 123 Main Street. At least we show that we tried. I tried, I presented, I tried to get her the information. But if they refuse to sign, I can't make, well, I'm not showing you this house if you don't sign this paper. No, I'm not trying to hinder the transaction, right? So she refused. I wrote refused to sign, showed her the property. She said, thank you very much. Have a nice day. Never seen each other again since then. So it goes. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, I got a little bit more to say about working with real estate agent disclosure, and we'll look at the forms too. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this disclosure. We're going to look at the disclosure. I'm going to take attendance first. Let me first, you guys grab your books. I want to point something out to you. Look with me on page 167. Again, the book puts forms in the book and then the forms update, and it takes a while for the book to catch up. I don't know when they're going to publish a new book. Page 167 and 168 is what the brochure used to look like. I know you can't read that. Hang on. If you were to take 167 and 168 and blow it up, that's what you're looking at on 169 through 173. So the information you can't see on 166 to 167 is blown up where you can see it on 169 to 173. And the old form was, it was tough. It was hard to explain. It was hard to read. We're getting ready to look at the new form. But a thing I want you guys to understand is even though the look of it changed, the information stayed the same. So what you see on 169 to well, not so much 73, that's part of the form that doesn't exist anymore. But 169 to 172, that information is still applicable. So you can see it talks about on 169, it talks about working with sellers. Over on 170, it talks about working with buyers. 171, there's dual agency. The old brochure, it just, if you heard, let's see, that they got the new disclosure in July of last year, so July of 2021. And if on July 1st of 2021, you happen to notice this woohoo across the entire state of North Carolina, that was brokers all over the state rejoicing that they got rid of the brochure that you're looking at in the book. And instead we got so much better, so much easier to explain. In Unit 7 in the Learn, Task, Pass material, we have the new working with real estate agent disclosure. And we were so happy, so happy. So there's two working with real estate agent disclosures. There's one for the seller and there's one for the buyer. And I have both of them in here for you guys to look at. And I think you should, because again, it helps explain agency, yet another way for you to understand agency. This form is required for use in all sales transactions, including residential and commercial. And it starts with some important stuff. What's it say at first? This form is not a contract. Signing this disclosure only means you've received it. In a real estate transaction, it's important to understand whether an agent represents you. Real estate agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact before asking for or receiving your confidential information, and give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This is for your own protection. Then what does this say? Do not share confidential information with an agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agency agreement with an agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others. So again, what do you say? Use the forms to help you put words in your mouth. That's pretty clear, isn't it? So then it goes down and it begins to explain the different types of agency options in which we can work. And I'll let you guys look at this part. So I could go in as a seller's agent. I could be your listing agent. We could go in as a dual agent, designated dual agent. So we're going to define, I'm not creating agency. I'm simply checking the boxes next to the possibilities. Maybe we'll do dual, maybe we'll do designated. If your firm doesn't offer designated, then you don't check this box. If the seller is a for sale by owner, buyer agent working with an unrepresented seller, we still do it with the for sale by owner, making sure that they understand that my loyalty is to the buyer. not to them, right? So we still give them this disclosure. If they're for sale by owner, we check this box. There's a place for sellers to sign, agent signs. And then we're going to go through that same exercise for the buyers. So there's a disclosure for the sellers and a disclosure for the buyers. And what are our relationships? We could be a buyer agency, dual agency, designated agency, or we could go in as an unrepresented buyer, also known as a seller subagent. So we're defining our relationship at first substantial contact. We're saying, stop talking. I do not owe you confidentiality. And the real estate commission says at this point in time, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. What are our options? If the buyer doesn't want buyer agency, then our only option is for you to be a seller subagent, for that buyer to be unrepresented. So this is the new disclosure that we all like. We keep everything for 3 years. Remember, I deliver all instruments within 3 days. General rule of thumb says if they sign it, they deserve a copy of it. So once they sign it, I'm going to somehow get a copy in their hand. If you're face to face, maybe you just snap a picture of it with your phone so you can put that image in your file, right? And send them away with the paper copy. I mean, just a suggestion. If you're doing it electronically, you'll all have copies when they sign it. In addition to the new easy to understand disclosure, the commission also produced a Working with Real Estate Q&A brochure. And this is going to be a little harder to see, so let me just kind of blow it up. It's supposed to be folded, so it's like a yeah, I thought I had one handy to it, but it's like a brochure that opens up, you know, but it starts with Q&A on working with real estate agents. Do not share confidential information. Again, we're putting this in their hand. We're explaining it to them, but then we're putting literature in their hand. So it says, you know, what does agency mean? What is in an agency agreement? And then the brochure breaks it down. Here's Q&A for sellers. I want to sell my property. How is the listing firm compensated? Right? So it has a section for seller. There's Q&A for buyers. So depending on who you're talking to, is it a potential seller or potential buyer? You can kind of point them in the right direction. And then on the second page of the brochure, yeah, we're still on buyers on the second page. What is the risk if I agree to dual agency? So it explains dual agency to the buyer and the seller. It's in the seller section as well. Here's termination, how agency agreements end. We're helping to educate the consumer. And again, we can use this brochure to help put words in our mouth to know what to say. My favorite part about this whole thing, y'all know I've been saying I like pictures, right? Word must have finally got down to the real estate commission because they now gave us pictures. Yay, we were so happy when we got this new information. The pictures kind of help define, it's the little things in life, right? The relationship. So here's buyer agency and seller agency. You have a buyer with a broker A. Broker B is a different color, indicating that they're with different firms. So you have one firm working with the buyer, a different firm working with the seller. This indicates there's buyer agency and seller agency. Dual agent is how many firms? Dual agent is just one agent, one firm working with, see, they're holding hands. I love this. They're holding hands with the buyer and the seller. And then designated dual agency. You got two agents, one holding hand with the buyer and another one holding hands with the seller. Dual agency, I'm sorry, with two agents. The agents are holding hands, right? Because they're with the same firm. Designated, they're not holding hands. Is that not adorable? I was so happy when they put pictures in. So this is something we can put in the consumer's hand. Once we explain it to them, And once we get them to sign agency, then we have a brochure. And this comes in a flat PDF as well. So if you don't, I don't know how much the brochures are, but if their firm doesn't provide them and you don't want to pay for them, you can get a flat PDF from the Real Estate Commission's website and put that in their hand as well. Commission doesn't care as long as we get them the information. The Q&A brochure is not required. The only thing that's required is the disclosure. But goodness, the Q&A brochure helps. And if nothing else, the pictures are so good. So I saw a question, I saw a hand. Was that Lexi?
So this is the first document that they sign before y'all even enter a contract together with the buyer or seller, whoever your
There you
client
go.
is. Okay,
Because
gotcha.
we do this at first substantial contact. And it's so important. It's so important that we understand this does not create agency.
I have another
That's what
question.
I'm saying again. What, Lexi? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I have another question. So what if they refuse to sign the first document and then they say, you know what, I do want to work with you. I am going to hire you, Julie. What happens then?
I'm not anyway. So if they say refuse to sign and then, okay, whatever, I'll show you this house anyway. And they say, okay, this is nice. And we go on, I show them another. Just because they don't sign this doesn't mean we can't have a relationship. Right.
Okay.
So they refuse to sign. I say, whatever, refuse to sign. 3 weeks from now, they finally trust me a little bit. Right. A lot of that is, there's that reputation of the pushy salesman. In some real estate agents, we have that reputation. So sometimes with the consumer, it's building trust. It's building that relationship. So 3 weeks from now, you find the home that you want. I get you to sign buyer agency, and I'm going to get you to sign this now too, right? So now I have two. I have one that you refuse to sign, and then I have another that you did. So please understand, that's a great point. I can still work with them even if they refuse to sign this, because this does not create agency. This is not a contract. The only thing that they're signing is receipt. So just because they don't sign it doesn't mean we're done. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep trying. What other questions do we have working with real estate agent disclosure? Again, it's worth me saying several more times. I think we got a problem topic on our hands, hey? Agency disclosure does not create agency. What creates agency? I see mouths moving.
Your agreement.
Written agreement.
There we go. What creates agency? The agency agreement. Everybody good with that? The disclosure is just that. It's disclosing agency. Questions? I like the pictures too. I was so happy when they were, like I said, last July 1st, I promise you, statewide, you heard this resounding woo. That was every single real estate broker across the state going, thank God. So much better. Life is so much better. So I have one more thing to say. Back to the point that came up earlier tonight. When we talk about taking your past experiences and throwing them out the window, I can almost guarantee you, if you've ever bought or sold a home before, you're thinking about this right now. And you're wondering if you signed this, or probably when you bought or sold what you want with a 167 and 168, since we just got this last July. Statewide, agents do a really bad job at presenting this. Statewide, we don't do a good job. Statewide, we don't do it right. Statewide, we try to slip it in when they're signing the agency agreement. I promise you, you signed this or the brochure, depending on when you bought or sold. It just wasn't presented to you and it wasn't done properly. Guys, does that make it right? No. What does the real estate commission say? And if you ever get that letter of inquiry, the brown envelope, one thing that they will always ask you for is a working with real estate agent. And if you can't have it and you can't produce it, you might have generated your own disciplinary action with the real estate commission. If you can't produce this, the real estate commission can say, hey, where's your working with real estate agent? Why don't you have it? Why wasn't it signed at first substantial contact? Why did you wait until you signed the offer before you signed working with real estate agents? When you join your firm, I tell you guys, the first couple of times you do this, it's bumpy, it's awkward. You're something like disclosure, confidentiality, sign here, right? It sounds horrible, but trust me, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Think of like your elevator pitch, right? You're going to have to practice it. It takes a few times to get good at it. I feel so stupid with role playing, but stuff like role playing in your firm, again, it helps put words in your mouth. So when you're with the public, you don't sound like a bubbling idiot. After your first couple times, you will your first time, I promise. And you'll be like, oh my God, I sound like a moron. Yep, you did. Once you do it a few times, it gets better. I promise you it gets better. But do not say, oh, well, nobody else does it, so I'm not going to do it either. Because I'm telling you, it's not a problem until it's a problem, and then it's a problem. And when does it become a problem? When somebody files a complaint on you, and the real estate commission asks for in the letter of inquiry, they ask for the working with real estate agent disclosure, they ask for your agency agreement, and they ask for all other documentation that supports the complaint. Even if the complaint is not about agency, they will ask you for this. My firm, we probably go through this once a year just to make sure we're all good. We're all doing it. We did it last July when they released this. Probably need to put it on the books to go through it again in September, just to make sure everybody's good. So again, past experience out the window. That's not what your test is going to be on. But don't be like that agent down at the coast that had the commissioner come into her open house. He gave her 3 chances to do it, and she did not. 3rd try, commissioner said, who's your pick? Have you ever had that feeling where your gut like falls in your stomach? I'm sure that's what she got when he said, I'm a real estate commissioner. She probably uttered some 4-letter words, didn't she? Questions? Comments? Okay. Again, you guys look this stuff over this weekend. Q&A brochure, whatever pages I just said, the rule didn't change, the law didn't change, the information didn't change. The only thing that changed is the look of it. Okay, so whenever you find old information, it's still good. It just looks different, and it's so much easier to deal with. Y'all be grateful you're here now and not last year, 2 years ago. Okay. Just real quick, we'll see this again in license law and commission rule when we get there. When you are disclosing your agency status to a prospective buyer or seller, somebody you're meeting for the first time, we have a duty to disclose that status at first substantial contact, FSC, first substantial contact. If you are a seller's agent or a seller sub-agent communicating with a buyer, the rule says we disclose at first substantial contact. But if you're a buyer's agent, if you're already hired as a buyer's agent and you communicate with a seller or a seller's agent, then we disclose our status at initial contact. The difference in first substantial contact and initial contact. First substantial contact is when the conversation switches gears from the property to the person. Initial contact is, hey, my name is Julie Campbell. Usually when initial contact happens is when I'm contacting the listing agent to schedule a showing. I have a buyer. They want to see 123 Main Street. We use a centralized showing program called Showing Time, which means I can go into Showing Time. Triad does. I don't know about others, but we can go into Showing Time and schedule all of our showings in one place. When I go into Showing Time to schedule a showing, I have to check a box. Am I a buyer's agent or am I a seller sub-agent? I disclose that status at initial contact. I can't schedule the showing without disclosing my status. So when the seller and the listing agent get the request for the showing appointment, the email says, Julie Campbell, comma, buyer's agent, comma, wants to see your property tomorrow at 2 o'clock. That's initial contact. What if my buyer says, I want to see this listing, but I have a question. Will you ask a question? Sure, absolutely. I call the listing agent and say, hey, my name is Julie Campbell, and I have a buyer that's interested in your listing. I disclose my status of being a buyer's agent at initial contact. That's the difference in first substantial and initial. I'll put it to writing when I present the offer. When we look at our offer to purchase and contract in Unit 10, there's a place again for me to check my role. Who am I and why do I get to be here? And that's how we put that relationship in writing. So first substantial contact, unless you're already a buyer's agent, you've already been hired to be a buyer's agent, and you're reaching out to the seller or the listing agent, and that can be oral. Again, hi, my name is Julie Campbell and I have a buyer. That just happened orally. I'll put it in writing when I bring the offer. I'll check the appropriate box and we'll look at that in Unit 10. And we'll see all this again in License Law and Commission Rule. It's in the back of your book on the comments. One more thing to say about agency disclosure. Remember I just said, I'm going to go back for 1 second. Agency disclosure is required on all sales transactions, residential sales, commercial sales. It's not really an exception, but something we need to discuss are auctions. Auction sales are sales, but they're not treated the same as residential sales or commercial sales. If you're dealing with an auction, you're in a totally separate bucket. Working with real estate agents is not required in auctions, auction transactions. If you're asked a test question about the working with real estate agent disclosure, assume the sales transaction is all sales transactions. The only time you need to worry about auction is if you're specifically asked about auction. Do not worry about auction unless you see the word auction. If you don't see the word auction, pretend like it doesn't exist. So don't worry about auctions unless you need to. Question? Is that an accidental unmute? Just want to make sure. Okay. Again, next week we're going to get into Unit 8. Unit 8 is our agency agreements. Agency agreements eventually have to be put in writing. We're going to talk more about this. There's an exception. The real estate commission will allow us to work with a buyer or tenant at first under an oral buyer agency agreement. I have to eventually put it in writing. But I am allowed to work at first with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. An oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. Under an oral buyer agency agreement, what do I owe that buyer? Under an oral buyer agency agreement, what do I owe that buyer?
Nothing.
It's a buyer agency agreement.
Old car.
There we go. An oral buyer
agreement.
agency agreement is an agency agreement. We just haven't put it in writing yet. Guys, here's the deal with buyers. As we mentioned earlier, buyers are like these scared, skittish little creatures, and they scare easily. And if I were to meet you, you would say, I want to buy a house. Great, my name is Julie. We're going to get an agency agreement. I need you to sign here, here, and here. What's the buyer going to do? Run away. I just terrified them, right? So the commission allows me to work under a capacity with a buyer at an oral agreement at first. Please understand, Lexi, I'll get you 1 second. Please understand, this is an express agreement, which means the terms are still spelled out. We're still having the conversation. We're still discussing dual agency. We're still talking about everything. If you have a verbal conversation, go home and follow it up with an email. Because what do we document? Everything. So if you have a verbal conversation, we're going to do oral buyer agency at first. I owe you OCAR. Do you want to do dual agency? Da, 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 da. How do I solidify that? I go home and I followed up with an email talking about, per our conversation, we're in an oral buyer agency agreement. It's express. Remember, our express agreements are stated specifically. Can be oral, can be in writing. In this case, it's at oral at first. The rule and the law say that I have to put that oral agency agreement in writing before I can present an offer on somebody's behalf. I can work with you under an oral agreement until you say, this is it, this is the one, write it up. I want to present an offer. And at that time, I have got to put our oral buyer agency agreement in writing. The two caveats to oral buyer agency: it cannot be exclusive. Exclusivity in real estate is a one-way street. If you're dating somebody exclusively, how many people should you be dating? How many? Yeah, just one. If you're dating somebody exclusively, you should only be dating one, right? Guys, just one. So if the buyers, if it's exclusive buyer agency, it's a one-way street. The buyer is only allowed to date one firm. The firm can date as many buyers as they want. The firm can date as many sellers as they want. If I have 500 agents out there, how many listing agreements do I have? How many buyers agency agree? Exclusivity is a one-way street. But I cannot demand exclusivity in an oral buyer agency agreement. So in an oral buyer agency agreement, my buyer is free to date as many firms as they want to. If I demand us to be exclusive, then I got to put it in writing. The second caveat is I cannot have a specific period of time. I can't say we're going to work together for 2 months under an oral buyer agency agreement. If I put a time period on our relationship, I got to put it in writing. This whole slide is a problem topic. Take a picture of it, write it down, watch the recording. We'll see this again in Unit 8. We'll see this again in License Law and Commission Rule. I got a little bit more to say about oral buyer agency, but I want to catch Lexi's question real quick.
Okay, so for the second bullet point, be for a specified time period. So if you say that I'm going to work with you for 2 months, you documented everything like that. What happens if you exceed that 2 months?
Well, we're in writing now, right? If I say we're going to work
Mhm.
together for 2 months, we can always extend it if we choose.
Okay, gotcha.
Right?
Okay,
We can always extend an agency agreement. Absolutely. If the
Okay.
parties agree. Yep. So if I haven't found you a house in 2 months, but you're happy with me, you know, I'm trying and I'm doing everything I can. You might say, Julie, can I get 2 more months with you? Or I might say, Lexi, can I try for 2 more months? Right? You know, so we can agree to extend that. What we can't do is have a specific period of time on an oral buyer agency.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay. If I demand a specific time period, then I got to put it in writing. Guys, there are buyers out there that will call several firms. They'll call several brokers and they'll say, this is specifically what I'm looking for. The first one to find it for me wins, go. So they may have a couple people out there and the first one to find them what they're looking for, I'll sign a buyer's agency agreement with you. Again, and tenants too. Tenants fall in this category. If you ever get the opportunity to represent a tenant. The whole reason that the commission allows us to do this is to help build that relationship, build that trust. Spend some time with the buyer, let them know that I'm all right, that they can trust me, that I have their best interest in mind. I'm working for them. Some firms, some brokers do not practice oral buyer agency. There are firms and agents out there that say, if you don't sign this, then I'm not going to work with you. And I direct you back to our point earlier tonight. Your test is not going to be on what you are going to do. Your test is going to be on what you can do. Can you work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first? Whether you're going to do it or not, the answer is yes, you can. And that's what you're going to be tested on.
Julie, I have a question.
Yes.
So when it comes down to working for a firm and you have these specifics laid out in your contract, can they go against what the commission say? Can they say, hey, this is okay? Because I'm just
Finish
wondering.
that. I'm sorry. That made me nervous when you said that. But
no, it's fine, because based off what you were saying, it's like maybe your firm can tell you, hey, we're not going to do an oral agreement, but the commission says, oh, you can.
The commission says you can, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to. You're allowed to, but you can choose to practice differently. You cannot, violate the rules, of course, right? Right. So the commission says, I'll allow you to, under these stipulations. The firm can make the decision, or I know plenty of brokers that will not talk to a buyer until they sign an agency agreement. We'll talk more about working with buyers next week. So the commission, in this case, they kind of set the floor, right? Like you can do anything up here, but this is, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Don't go against the commission.
No, that makes sense. Thank you. Interrupt me. I'm here for it.
I was like, get my brown paper bag. I mean, All right. What if, I hear you guys, here we go. What if the buyer finds a home? They say, let's write up an offer. Will you present an offer on my behalf? I'm not signing that. Are you kidding me? What if you're ready to present that offer and the buyer refuses to sign? If they refuse to sign, I can no longer represent that buyer as a client because they refuse to enter into a written agency agreement with me. And how do you become my client? Eventually, we get into a written agency agreement. I cannot present an offer on your behalf on a handshake. So if you refuse to sign, you can't be my client anymore. I may give you the option to become a customer. We have to have conversations. Up until this point, you've been my oral client, right? If I make the switch to a seller subagent, my loyalty switches too. I go from making the switch from you, the buyer, to the seller. And before we agree to you being downgraded to my customer, I should probably remind you what I know about you, that confidential information that I have. Because once you get downgraded to a customer, once I become a seller subagent, my duty's now to the seller. So whatever I know about you, and guys, we're not leading the buyer into this blind. We're telling, look, you don't want to sign this, this is fine. These are your options. You either get downgraded to a customer. If you choose that, this is what's going to happen. If they say, no, 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 I don't want to be a customer. I don't want to be a client, and I don't want to be a customer. I'm out. I have no other legal option to work with them. You have two choices. You're either my client or my customer. And if you don't want to do either, I have no other legal choice. I have nothing else I can do for you. As a last ditch effort, we can always, and when we look at our buyer agency agreement next week, we'll see this. I can always create a buyer agency agreement for one address. So if they don't want to enter into any kind of commitment to you, but they really want to present an offer, like, look, let's just do buyer agency for 123 Main Street. If it works out, you're my client. If it doesn't, we're probably going to part ways because you're difficult, right? So we can always do that last ditch effort to try to get them in buyer agency just for that one property, so I can present an offer on their behalf. Lexi, did I see a new hand pop up there?
You answered my question.
Okay. Because oral buyer agency is oral at first, our buyer agency agreement is oral at first. Remember, it's express, so I'm still explaining it. I'm covering my butt by following up with an email, right? Because I document everything. You're going to rely on that buyer to stand in court and say, no, she didn't tell me that. So how do you protect yourself? Follow it up with an email. And because buyer agency can be oral at first, when it comes to buyers, dual agency can be oral at first. I can have an oral agreement to dual agency. I still have to explain it to them. I still have to have the discussion. I still have to have their oral consent. I still have to put it in writing before I present the offer. But if I have an oral buyer agency agreement and the buyer says, I want to see 123 Main Street, and my firm has 123 Main Street listed, I have to get oral consent to dual before I can show them the property, before I can proceed, assuming the seller has already agreed to dual. Dual agency, we can change our mind orally in dual as long as one party agreed to it orally. So the seller agreed to it in writing. Maybe the buyer at first said no orally, and then they later changed their mind. They can change their mind orally. Once they say no in writing, the only way they can change their mind is in writing. And that's where this is I'm happy we made it here today. Pages 162 to 163. There's different situations. That's what those are about. or oral dual agency, and changing your mind. And when can you change your mind? If both parties are in writing and we change our mind, both parties got to change in writing. If one's in writing and one's oral, we can change our mind orally. Does that make sense? 162 and 163. And that's where these scenarios come in. And I think that's where those scenarios help. Questions? Have I blown y'all's mind tonight? I told you Unit 7 was getting thick, didn't I? I did not kid you on that. You guys going to spend time with that this weekend? Everybody shake your head yes. Everybody. I want to see heads shaking yes. Thank you. Unit 7, I'll just give myself a little dizzy. Unit 7, license law and commission rule. You got the recording. You got my PowerPoints. Guys, nobody is leaving this call today as a dual agency expert. Even if you're sitting there thinking, this all makes sense, I get it. Let it marinate, come back and revisit it again, revisit it again. We'll see this in Unit 8. We'll see this in license law and commission rule. As sure as I stand you here in front of a blue shirt, you'll see it on my exam and you'll see it on your state exam. Questions? I'll take a big deep breath with me. It's nice.
I'm guessing since this entire chapter is the same thing over and over and over again, this is some important information on the test.
Got it. He's got it. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Have I mentioned that? Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested unit. We got 1 out of 4 down. Good times. Okay. The very last thing to say in 7 is green stars. Y'all just kind of chillax with me for a second. We can get through the next 6 minutes and we can talk about this. We've danced all around it. The last part of it is talking about the nature of your broker's relationship. So each office has a broker in charge. Each office has one broker that's been designated to be the boss. They're responsible for maintaining the day-to-day operations, and the provisional brokers and the unlicensed staff. We'll talk about that, license law and commission rule as well. You have to have one designated broker in charge per office. So again, our previous example, if you have a firm with 3 office locations, how many BICs do I need? I need 3, 1 under each roof. Okay, and they're responsible for that office. And one of the biggest responsibilities of the broker in charge is soon to be you guys, provisional brokers. Once you get your license, your provisional brokers, I call you brokers with training wheels. Provisional brokers can do just about everything that a full-blown broker can do, as long as they're under the direct supervision of a broker in charge. You get your license, your provisional broker, you affiliate with a firm, the BIC takes you under their wing, and they're making sure you get started right. They're going to make sure that you get started. They're going to offer you more training. They're going to offer you, they're going to go with you on your first listing appointment. They're going to go with you on your first closing. They're going to send you with a top producer when they go to measure a house, right? They're not just going to hand you a license and let you run amok on the street and say, here you go, good luck. Remember, the commission's main purpose is to protect the public. So they want to make sure that you know what you're doing before they turn you loose. We'll talk more about the provisional broker. The BIC is responsible for the actions of all the brokers in the firm. If a provisional broker gets in trouble with the real estate commission, they will take their BIC down with them. If the provisional broker gets a letter of inquiry, the BIC will too. If a full broker gets in trouble with the real estate commission, the BIC may get in trouble as well. It just depends. It depends on what they did. If it's a violation of agency or agency disclosure, you better believe the BIC's going to get a letter of inquiry as well. Going into sales, for the most part, you guys are going to go in as an independent contractor. Independent contractor means you work for who? You work for you. You are your own boss. You affiliate with a firm. They're not hiring you. You affiliate with a firm. Compare an independent contractor to an employee. An employee gets a W-2, independent contractor gets 1099. The difference between the two, the W-2, taxes are withheld. The 1099 taxes are not withheld. But rest assured, at the end of the year, Uncle Sam is still standing there with his hand out, going, you had a really good year. Sweet, where's my cut? So as an independent contractor, you will pay taxes at the end of the year. I always suggest agents in their first year hire an accountant, because that accountant can help you decide how much of your commission to set aside so you're not blindsided by Uncle Sam at the end of the year. The accountant can also help you. There's certain tax write-offs you might be able to take. So for example, your mileage, your marketing dollars. There's certain things that you can write off. So is anybody an independent contractor right now in another industry? A couple of you? Yep. So you know what I speak of. You know what I'm talking about. If you've only ever been a W-2, you're in for a surprise. And I just suggest that you get with an accountant to help educate you, help make sure that you're setting yourself up right. Employees are paid salary or hourly. We are paid commission, and I'm paid when it closes. We get into Unit 8, we're going to talk about when I earn my commission versus when I actually get paid. We'll talk about your commission next week. The broker in charge can dictate the employee's hours and conditions. The broker in charge tells the employee, you punch in at 9 o'clock, you take lunch at 12, you leave at 5, Monday through Friday. Independent contractor, they can set their own hours. If you want to work today, great. If you don't, all right, that's up to you. If you want to work 3 days a week, if you want to work 29 days out of the month, you're an independent contractor. Guys, I'm telling you, real estate is one of those industries that you get out of it what you put into it. And if you want to be a top producer, you're not going to work 3 days a week. If you want to dabble and sell a house here and there, you can work 3 days a week. But if you want to have 40 to 50 closings a year, you're working 29 to 30 days a month. You can choose to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You can choose. But if you do that, you're limiting your pool of buyers. You're limiting your pool of sellers, right? Think about, when do most buyers work? Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So when do they want to look at properties? Evenings and weekends. And if you say, I'm not working weekends, that's your prerogative. You're an independent contractor. But understand, you won't be able to work with the buyers that can't see homes during the week. You guys hear what I'm saying? This is an all decision for you to make. This is one thing that real estate's nice, is it's flexible. We can set our own schedules. Woo, 8:30, stop talking, Julie. See, y'all interrupt me and say, stop talking. So we're going to stop talking. And I'm going to pick back up here. I got just a few more things to say about Unit 7 when we come back next week. I'm close. So close enough that I'm happy. I'm very happy with where we made it tonight. And then we get going in Unit 8. So if you haven't looked at Unit 8 yet, please do so. Please do so. I'm telling you, it's a lot easier when you look at it before you come to class. And we'll probably get into Unit 9 next week too. So study Unit 7, spend time with Unit 7, look at 8 and 9. Let me know if you have any questions this weekend. Never hesitate to reach out to me. That's why I'm here. So reach out to me. Let me help you. Goodness, I've been talking a lot tonight. All right. Y'all
Julie,
have a
what's
good
your best
weekend.
form of contact?
Say it again.